Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our Benson Marketing Group live event celebrating cool climate Syrah and Shiraz. My name is Taya Schlendorf of Benson, and I'll be serving as the moderator. So today we're joined by a panel of winemakers who are going to be discussing this varietal and what it is like to work with it and grow it in a cooler climate. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This presentation is being recorded and will be accessible to view at a later date. We encourage you to give your thoughts and ask questions in the chat function. We'll be keeping an eye on that and work in those questions as we go along. Our winemakers are going to be introducing themselves and their wines to you in a relative tasting order. That being said, you can taste the wines on, now as we go through that, or at a later date that works better for you. And of course, we'll have a Dropbox file with all relevant information and assets to reference as we go along. So cool climate Syrah and Shiraz. This is, cool climate is not something that many associate with this variety. So how are we defining this? And one metric that we can use is a place where Syrah or Shiraz is planted near where Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are grown. And this is certainly very true for a few of our folks. And speaking of, let me now introduce each of our panelists and have them more formally tell you about themselves and their wines. And so we're going to start in Australia with Adam Lauder of Mount Langi, Ghiran. Here we are. Mount Langi, Ghiran is located in the Grampians area of the state of Victoria in Australia. And Adam is the winemaker. So Adam, take it away. Tell us about Mount Langi, Ghiran, yourself, and the Cliff Edge Shiraz, the 2019 Cliff Edge Shiraz, which you all should be receiving as soon as Customs releases it for us. Apologies about that.
Thanks for your introduction, Claire. So I'm Adam Lauder. I'm the chief winemaker here at Mount Langi, Ghiran in the Grampians region of southeastern Australia, which is in Victoria. So very cool spot where we are. A little bit about myself. I grew up around the corner from Mount Langi. I started working here basically as a kid. I was coming in and doing a bit of pest control, getting rid of birds basically. And then I started as a cellar hand here when I was 18 in 1998. And that's what really introduced me to the cool climate winemaking stuff. Also spent a bit of time overseas. I worked 5 vintages in Bordeaux, 6 in the Napa Valley. And then, returned back to Australia in 2016, came back to Mount Langi and took over the chief winemaker role in 2018. So in Australia, we're considered a cool climate benchmark, or we have been for a long time. So one of the great things about the cool climate here, I guess, is what you'll get from the Shiraz is you'll get berry fruit. It's not really rich. It's more elegant, medium bodied, and quite spicy. So that's what you should expect from our 2019 Cliff Edge Shiraz. It's really an introduction to cool climate Shiraz in Victoria, but especially the Grampians. It's a good example of Grampian Shiraz.
Thank you. And now let's come to the United States, and we're going to go to Paul Clifton here of Hahn Family Wines. Paul is the director of winemaking, and they're based in the Santa Lucia Highlands, and from them you should have the 2018 Hahn Winery Selection Syrah. So Paul, take it away and tell us about Hahn and this wine.
Right on. Yeah, I started working with the Hahn family in 2003, and we're primarily known for Chardonnay and Pinot. This is a big Chardonnay and Pinot Noir region. But there was some Syrah planted on one of our vineyards back then. And as we continue to redevelop, there's a section of people that in sales mainly that wanted to transfer some of that over to Pinot Noir. And I was very resistant because the Syrah, we were receiving Syrah from both warmer climates, Paso Robles area, as well as our own vineyards in the Santa Lucia Highlands. And there's a big difference between the two. And, I just really fell in love with that particular Rhone variety. So I fought to keep it. And we still have about 10 acres of it. and it's more for me to play around with. We don't really market it on a national. We did try it on a national retail, but it was a tough sell. But I love making it, so we do make it for our wine club and tasting rooms, and we'll continue to do so forever. Also, with the Syrah, we also being turned out so well, we also decided to plant some Grenache, which is also doing really well in the South Sea Highlands. So a little bit about my background. I studied business in Colorado. I got into the winemaking business in 1996, both in Carmel Valley, which is just over the hill here, and in Santa Cruz Mountains across the Monterey Bay, both cool climate areas, and continued to love making these varieties, and decided to go to school in New Zealand which focuses on cool climate variety in terms of farming and winemaking, and started here in 2003 with the Hahn family. You're on mute.
I think after this long, I would have figured that out. So thank you, Paul. Coming up to the Russian River Valley and Anthony Beckman of Balletto Vineyards. From Balletto, you should have the 2017 Syrah BCD. So Anthony, take it away and tell us about yourself and Balletto and this wine.
Sure. Again, like Paul, this is Syrah planted literally right next to Pinot Noir. Ironically, when we harvest the Pinot, it is always the very first pick of the year because I do a sparkling pick out of this same vineyard. And then about 12 days later, I'll go in and do a still wine, a regular wine, single vineyard BCD from this vineyard. And then like 6 or 8 weeks later, I will pick the Syrah. So the Pinot comes in so much earlier than the Syrah. The Syrah just takes a long time because we're in such a cold climate. Balletto Vineyards is in the southern third of the Russian River Valley. So, as for people that know Russian River Valley, as you get further south and further to the coast, further west, so the southwest corner is the coldest part of the Russian River Valley. And as you move north and east up towards Healdsburg and Chalk Hill region, it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. And this is all due to the coastal influence of fog coming into the Russian River Valley, up a couple of things up the Petaluma Gap, up through the Bohemian Highway, and then up through, of course, the Russian River Valley itself. So where we are in the Russian River Valley, this is probably one of the coolest spots where Syrah is planted, period. It's an awesome spot, and I don't know of any Syrah, at least more than an acre or two. I'm sure there's some little bits and pieces around, but I don't know of any Syrah that's in a colder spot in the appellation. I've been making this wine for Balletto Vineyards since 2007 vintage. It's a wine that ages shockingly well. We went back to the same Syrah in the 2008 and 2009 vintages about a month ago, and the wine showed so well. It's totally an underrated wine, I think, for Russian River Valley, and there's not a lot of it at all. And it's just a special thing, and we're totally in love with this little. It's about 6 acres, 7 acres, and every year it's super distinct and very much a classy style of Syrah. I've been the winemaker at Balletto Vineyards. Came here in 2007, so I've been working with this same block of vines for 14, 15 years now. And it's awesome to just watch how this has developed. The vineyard was planted in 2002 and really started to kick into gear right when I came on in 2007, as it really started to show what it can do. And again, like Paul, I would never rip this Syrah out. And even though it may be more profitable to put something else there, emotionally, it would just be really, really devastating to not have this wine in our lineup of wines.
And so we're so glad that you don't. Moving into the discussion phase here, because each of you, mentioned a couple of different points in your introductions that we'd like to get into a little more deeply. I'm just going to set this up such that we can see all of your faces here. So let's kick it off with our first question, if you will, point to touch on, which is, and again, each of you touched on this a little bit, but let's expand upon it. But why Syrah or Shiraz? What role does this play in your winery's portfolio, or how has it really tugged on your heartstrings to keep it?
I can go first. For me, originally we tried to launch the single variety Syrah in 2006 under our Hahn SLH label. And it was, it had all the accolades. It was really good. We did it for 2006, 2007, 2008. But the sales team just could not move it. Spectacular wine. And, I'm like, we can't rip this out. We've got to use it in some program. So, at that time, Rhone blends or red blends were becoming quite the phenomenon. And we had planted Grenache just because Syrah was doing so well. So we launched GSM. So that has become a huge part of our program for our Hahn Founders lineup, and continues to be so. And it's growing like crazy. And the Syrah is really the backbone of the blend, and I want to plant more.
And Anthony, I think you similar situation. Obviously, a lot of your focus is within Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but as you mentioned, this is actually planted in the same vineyard as some of your Pinot.
It is, and I love having it as the foil to Pinot Noir, because Pinot's really light in color, of course. Tannins are different. Viscosity and mouthfeel, of course, is wildly different. And so you'll get consumers who, even wine club members, like good consumers, core consumers, who want something richer, a little bit more weight, a little bit more tannin than some of the Pinots. And I always go, oh, perfect, have the Syrah. It's not Pinot. The Pinot's not Syrah, and the Syrah's not Pinot. And they're wildly different. And when you put the two side by side, I really feel you appreciate both more, because you can see this really, very typical Pinot, and then you move to this cool climate Syrah, and it's 100% different, but holds the core, what I would say, like the core values of the Pinot, which is it's not hugely alcoholic. It has a great acidity to it. There's like a real elegance to the wine. It's not like cough syrup. There's a lot of big, huge, thick wines out there. And even though it's Syrah and it's bigger, it still holds the core values of Pinot and the core values of Balletto Vineyards. And it's just so much fun to use it and taste them side by side like that.
I love that phrase, core values. I think that's really interesting, and a good segue, because Adam, obviously in a little bit of a converse situation, Shiraz is really the focus for Mount Langi Ghiran. As you mentioned, you are a benchmark producer for especially this cool climate area. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about what you have going there. I know you and whereas with some of these others, it's Syrah is this one bottling, but for you've got several different expressions.
We do. I mean, Shiraz is our core value. That's what we do. It's roughly 85% of our production. So we're all about Shiraz, Syrah, and the cool climate example. So we have several different tiers, if you will. So there's, at the top, we've got Langi, and then under that we have Mast, and then there's Payless, and then Cliff Edge, what you guys will be looking at today. Yeah, we're totally Shiraz fans, like fanboys, or whatever you want to say, but that's our main thing. We also do Cabernet and Riesling. There's a bit of Sangiovese and a little bit of Grenache too, but our main thing is Shiraz, and we've been, it's been grown here since 1969, and since the late 80s, early 90s, it's really been a benchmark for Australian cool climate Shiraz. back in 90, I think it was 96. Langi Shiraz was on the cover of Wine Spectator, I think, along with Henschke's, wasn't Hill of Grace, I think it was another one, but at Grange. So it really, that's what put Langi on international scale, I guess, or got us recognised internationally. And we've been recognised definitely domestically, but also internationally as a cool climate benchmark for Shiraz.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a good segue into, dialing into what it is about each of the areas that you work in that are important for the style of the final wine that you produce. But as Adam, as you're referencing some of these other Shiraz producers in Australia, of course, what most people associate with Australian Shiraz in terms of flavors and character of the wine, it is pretty drastically different from what you are seeing in your own wines. And if you just maybe give us a little bit of a comparison there.
Yeah, so from my few years that I've spent in the US, you definitely see a lot of Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale stuff, which is very rich. They're sort of heavier wines, like the thicker wines, like the other guys spoke about. Whereas, the cool climate stuff, which I'm sure the same as what they're making, they're more elegant, medium bodied. And the fruit profiles, it's a cooler fruit profile. So if you think of berries like blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, mixed spices, and just super fine tannin, like they're really medium bodied, easy, complex wines. They're quite long lived as well, with high acidity. So that's what you should expect from sort of cool climate, or at least our style of wine.
And would you say it's which aspects of your terroir you think contribute most of that? Is it elevation, some of the climate aspects, being in the mountains as you are, or soil, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's all site specific, right? So we're in between two mountains, Mount Langi, Ghiran, and Mount Cole. So it is quite cool. We get the sun is sort of shadowed by one of the mountains on the western side late in the afternoon. So we do get that relief, I guess, during the growing period, where it draws out the growing season like it has this year. Like we're still going, still got 2 weeks to go, which is very late. I mean, most people in Australia have well and truly finished their harvest by now. So that will add to the complexity of your grapes and the wine ultimately in the end. So you get this long drawn out period of growing season, and you'll get more complex and you'll have more layers in the wine, more layers of flavor.
And kicking it over to Paul and Anthony, thinking of other areas of California that might be trying to grow Syrah, but to very different effects. What do you see about your area that makes it so perfect for this style that you're aiming for?
For us, it's definitely fog flow, Pacific, and I'm sure Paul has a lot of the same. We have very, very cold mornings, and we can have really, really warm afternoons. We can see a 45 to 50 degree swing in temperatures. It'll be 54 in the morning, and you'll be out before the sun comes up walking vineyards, and by 3 o'clock it could be 85, maybe even 90. And this 40 degree swing is really pretty incredible. I would say that is the biggest influence for this Syrah is that swing. And what it really allows, I believe, to do is that when it cools down so cold at night, the grapevines really shut down. And what that does is they stop respiring acid. So you end up having grapes that retain acidity, which is awesome. And then slowly, as it heats up, then the grapevines kick into gear. They start ripening. They start respiring acid, changing, making sugars. And it's this real slow, hurry up during the day, slow down at night, hurry up during the day. And that to me is what defines this Syrah. And I think my whole region where I'm making all the wines.
Yeah, it's Anthony, it's interesting you say that, because I was tasting your 2017, and it really had a nice acidity to it. And that makes a lot of sense, just kind of slowing down that respiration. For us, I think, we also have to, down the San Lucia Highlands, we contend with the wind a lot. And between, the fog, which burns off usually around 10:30, 11, and then you'll have about 3 3 hours of good photosynthesis where there's actually sugar being pumped into the grape. And then the wind picks up and it's hitting, you know, on average 15, 20 miles an hour. It gets up to 30, you know, and that really shuts down photosynthesis in the afternoons. And I think what that allows, you know, this variety as well as Pinot Noir to do is develop the phenolics. You know, it's building up some protection from the sun, more color. You're not getting, you know, you're getting a really nice development of the seed, which provides a lot of tannin to the wine. You know, if you have a green seed in a wine, that's going to be pretty astringent. Well, and these things are like biting into a nut. They're not astringent at all by the time you pick them, and it really gives a nice, really round mouth feel, and you know, really retaining this kind of like a earthiness to the wine, almost like a white cracked pepper component to it. And I'm not sure why that's so different in a cool climate versus a warm climate where you get more of a jammy character, versus these cool climate Shiraz are kind of have that more spice to them, which I love.
And Paul, what are you doing for barrel aging? Because this is the only red wine that I do a full 2 years of barrel, you know, timing on, just because the tannins are pretty, like if I was to taste the 2021s that have been in barrel now 6 months, I mean, they're tannic beasts right now. They're pretty unpleasant to taste. So I've done it to 2 years. Are you kind of seeing the same thing, or are you?
Yeah, it's usually about a year and a half. You know, if we're doing a straight Syrah like this, but you know, when we're using Grenache, it's not, you know, it's much lighter. So this is kind of like the backbone. It's not that critical to have major barrel aging for the GSM blend, but as a single, yeah, definitely a year and a half at least.
And Adam, I bet you're doing it all over the map, right? Because you probably have 30 different lots, I'd imagine, of Syrah. Like how,
more.
even more. Yeah, cool. I mean, how does that work? Like, are there some places where you know it's lighter tannin and heavier tannin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, the property is quite diverse. So there is certain blocks that we know that they're going to need at least 18 months in oak, but generally that's you know, we'll push 12 to 18. It's not, we don't go as hard as you guys do. I guess we're probably a little bit lighter bodied maybe, but there's definitely stuff that benefits from coming out of oak, you know, definitely after 12 months, and then some that just needs to go that little bit further. So our top end stuff will stay in oak a bit longer because it's a lot denser, it's a lot richer, and it's a lot yeah, tougher, I guess. Need a bit of taming.
And do you usually pick the same blocks every year for your higher end bottlings?
Yeah, it's generally, we know what blocks perform and we know what to expect from them. They're very well balanced. So we know that, you know, our top end stuff, which is $200 a bottle, it comes off the oldest block, and we know exactly, you know, not exactly, but we know what to expect and what sort of profile we're going to get from it. And when there's a few younger ones and some of the blocks that go into cliff edge, you know, you kind of know when to pick, when, you know, tasting, obviously, you know, when the right time to pick them is for the tannin and for the longevity of the wine. So
yeah, Adam, is your like across all the different blocks and clones that you guys got, is the vinification pretty much similar across them all, or are you doing something different because, you know, one site's more tannic or and one's got less color, or is it pretty much similar across?
It varies a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of hand picking with our top end stuff. And a lot of that stuff it'll be in a smaller ferment, for example. So our ferments can vary from 16 tons down to 1. So a lot of the top end stuff will be, you know, 2-3 ton ferments. They'll get worked a lot more because there's more to extract. And they'll spend a lot more in oak or longer time on skins, whereas the younger stuff can be a shorter ferment, and you just want that sort of more fruit profile rather than extracting all that tannin and the hard stuff out of it. So it does vary quite a bit.
Speaking of knowing what to expect, let's talk a little bit about some of the different vintages. I mean, from each of you, we're talking about a wine from a different vintage, 2017, 2018, 2019. And then of course, there are the years in between, and there is what we know of 2022 so far. So let's talk a little bit about what each of those vintages were like for you and for your wine. And maybe we kick it off with Anthony going back to 2017. Tell us a little bit about what that was like and how, for Syrah, was that a notable or a memorable year, or was there a different year where the conditions were maybe a little more favorable?
It was really interesting in 2017 because during Labor Day weekend, we had a really big heat spike. Like we hit triple digits, which rarely happens. I think we did it for 2 days in a row, maybe even 3 days in a row. Super hot. It was just this hot, and there was wind, and it was like a hot, dry wind in early September of 2017. And because of the difference between Pinot and Syrah, the Pinot really took a beating from that. It was sitting at 21 bricks or so. And in 3 days, it went from 21 bricks to 25 bricks. Even though the sugar went up, really the grapes themselves weren't phenolically ripe. They were just dehydrated, right? So then we had a waiting period to try and get some irrigation on to bring them back into balance. At the same time, the Syrah was sitting at like 18 bricks or less. And this heat spell really pushed it in a great direction, just sort of the timing of it. For 2017, that heat came on right when the Syrah needed it most. It sort of pushed everything forward about 10 days. And then as it cooled down, it just was completely slow. And then it was this just gradual ripening. And we picked it about the same time, but I always felt it had a little bit more concentration than some of my other vintages. The flip side to it too is, the alcohol is a little bit higher. This is just over 14%. I think on the following year, the 18, I think it's 13.5, which is more in line. So we did have a little bit of a push in terms of this ripeness. And it made for me what I consider to be just a super fun wine to drink. I would love to have 17 harvest for Syrah happen all the time. I would not love for 17 harvest to happen all the time for Pinot, because it was really difficult to get those wines correct. The Syrah in 17 just sort of made itself, and it was what I consider like a layup, and the Pinot I was fighting and working really hard and losing sleep over. And the Syrah was like, oh, it tastes great. It tastes great. It tasted great from the day we picked it. It tasted great the day we pressed it off. It tasted great when it finished ML. And it was just one of those wines that just, it doesn't happen, as you guys know, it doesn't happen all that often, that there's just a wine from start to finish that was just problem free. Really a pleasure to make.
And just one more point. You had mentioned, the vintages lately are, whether it's due to climate change or other factors, they're just getting a little bit harder to predict exactly what's going to happen with each vintage. But I think you mentioned that in the past anyway, one of your bigger challenges, in part because of where you're located, was fighting things like mold. And so because of that, you were doing some leafing, but now that situation has actually changed, again, maybe with the evolution of how things are going in the valley there, but you stopped that to give more shade. Is that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there was a time, 15 years ago when we were first making this Syrah, when I at least was first making this Syrah off of this vineyard, where really, botrytis and mold issues were our number one concern. For us, this Syrah can get real slip skinny and really funky really quickly. Like you'll walk when the mold hits, which it has. One day you'll walk it and it looks pretty good, and the next day you walk it and you get a little scared, and the next day you walk it and you've already missed your window to do anything. It goes really fast for us. Again, it's fog driven. So we were leafing pretty heavily to get airflow in, so that when we had these really wet fog events, and it's foggy to the point that if you're out in the morning, water is dripping off the leaves, right? I mean, it's wet, and you reach in to look at a grape, and your back is wet from the fog hitting the leaves and the condensation off the leaves, and it's like dripping, literally dripping. And so we were really concerned about the mold, and we leafed pretty heavily. We have learned, though, that with the differences in temperatures and how it's sort of a roll of the dice if you're going to be warm or not warm, or sunny or not sunny, as everything is changing climatically. That we're leaving more leaves on, we're leaving more shade, we're trying to get these clusters protected. We're sacrificing a little bit of the airflow to get a little less heat on the clusters themselves through the fruit zone. And I believe it's really paid off. And you know, we just know that we have to watch. You can't have it both ways, right? So we know we have to watch the mold, and we know that if we have any rain events, the Syrah can handle about a 1/4 inch of rain in the growing season, and we're okay. The second 1/4 inch of rain, we've just got to be on top of it, or we've got to pick right away, because we'll lose the whole field with the way we're farming it. And as are my other winemakers here, you know, we're estate stuff, so we all know our vineyards really well. Like, we know that it can handle the first 1/4 inch, and the second 1/4 inch, you better get on it and get it picked, regardless of where it is, because you'll lose the whole thing. And I think Paul and Adam would agree that that's the beauty of making wine from the same block year in and year out and year in and year out. You just become very intimate with it, and you know what you need to do to make the wine. And for sure, we've changed our farming to base on how the weather has changed. And we're trying to keep our options open, because we don't know what the weather is going to do.
Yeah, speaking of weather, Paul, I think you had actually mentioned that the 2018, which is where the year your Syrah is from, it actually looks quite similar to how 2022 is going so far. Of course, there's still quite a bit of the 2022 season here in the Northern Hemisphere to play out, but tell us a little bit about that. And I think you mentioned that because of, in particular, because of the amount of rainfall that we were seeing so far. Now it's your turn to be on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, we're pretty much, we don't get a lot of rain here anyway. In the Salinas Valley, it averages where we are, it's about, 14, 15 inches versus, I think probably up north where Anthony is, it's probably double or more of that. So this year we only got so far, and it's looking like it's pretty much over, like 7.5 inches of rain. And that's very similar to 2018. We have very well drained soils here, so we have to irrigate, and we actually started irrigating in January to make up for the lost rainfall, so that when bud break happens, the vines are ready to go. And it seems like bud breaks happening earlier and earlier every year too. We saw bud break in Chardonnay in the second week of February this year, which kind of blew my mind a little bit. But it's flowering right now. I'm like, Jesus, it's still kind of early. But it's a very similar year to 2018 so far. 2018 actually turned out to be a really good year for us. A really good stop. Mocha. Sorry. Attack dog. No, it turned out to be a really good year for us. And it's, we're fighting our biggest fear is not mold or mildew. We're starting to see more and more heat spikes during September, October, which for Syrah, I'm not too worried about. It's a pretty resilient grape in terms of heat spike, as it can grow in a hot climate. So like Anthony, I'm running around freaking out about Pinot Noir. I put Syrah on the back burner, and that's maybe why I love it so much, because it's such a you just don't have to worry about it as much as Pinot. So when we get to when we finish all the Pinot and Chardonnay, then we look at the Syrah. It's like, we're looking at it anyway all season, but it's not like something you got to worry about quite as much as the other two varieties, cool climate varieties we grow here. So that's why it's such a relief to make, and it's so fun to make, because it's like, it's just ready to go by the time we're done with Pinot. It's usually we start Pinot and beginning of August, finish it maybe the beginning of October, and then we got a couple weeks break, and the Syrah is ready to come off, and we're done. and it's a pleasure to work with.
And Adam, slightly different story. I mean, first of all, I guess what the collective generalization of what Anthony and Paul have just said is that, you know, Syrah likes a little bit of heat. So if it's the heat spikes are probably not the issue for you as much as like this harvest that 2022 right now, you are still harvesting because it has been one of the cooler years on record. So by comparison, tell us a little bit about that, but then also, you know, touch on 2019, which is the year that the cliff edge was from.
Yeah, so 2019, I mean, we had a really windy couple of days during flowering, so we ended up with, you know, not the greatest fruit set. We're down probably 30 to 35% in our crops, and it was a warm year, warm, dry year. So it came in, you know, relatively early, and it was relatively compressed vintage as well. So, you know, it gave us richer flavors, bigger tannins, probably a bigger wine than we would normally have from the two previous, you know, 17 and 18 were above average crops, very good quality fruit, and then 19 came along, you know, yeah, like I just said, just a tough season, but really great quality. And then you've got this year where we've had, you know, it's really cool. We haven't had a lot of sun, well, you know, sunlight, but we haven't had enough warm weather, sunshine. We're really struggling to get things right. I mean, that's why we're still picking. So hopefully next week I'll have everything off, but that, you know, it's pretty late for us. Normally we wrap things up around Easter time each year or close enough to it, whereas this year we're well beyond. So, you know, the climate's definitely something that's making a big difference. But yeah, our biggest problem is we're kind of marginal where we are. So when we do get a cool year, we really struggle to get things right. But you know, as the guys touched on, we're probably similar to Paul in a way. Like we have relatively free draining soil, so we can handle a bit of rain, we can handle a bit of heat. Like Shiraz is very resilient and will grow anywhere. But it is one of those ones, you know, that whatever, no matter what the weather does, whether it's cool or warm, it'll always come up with something just to get through.
Keeping us on our toes. One of the last points I'd love to have you come back and touch on, because you had some really great things to say about this in our previous conversations. And effectively, it's the subject of what it's like to try and sell cool climate Syrah and Shiraz to a consuming public that doesn't necessarily link those two things. You know, what are some of the sort of misconceptions there that you are fighting against that you would love to correct with people?
Generally, a lot of people don't think that cool climates Syrah or Shiraz is a thing, you know, especially in Australia. From my experience in the US, people do expect that big fruit bomb. And it's even the same in Australia. There's a lot of people that don't believe that, you know, where we are, a lot of people think, oh, it's too cold to grow grapes there, isn't it? But, you know, it's not at all. And it is relatively cool, but I mean, yeah, we get that cool, that elegant, yeah, it's just a different style from what people think is what Shiraz is.
Yeah. And Anthony, I think you were saying it's a little bit, you were comparing it to some other varieties where there is a lot of variation that people don't really realize the full spectrum of it.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I always like to take a step back and say, you know, grapevines are really weeds. You know, they'll grow anywhere. You can take a cutting of a grapevine, just a cane or a shoot, and you know, right now there's still some lingering around. You could bury it in the ground and the bottom will grow roots and the top will shoot out, you know, leaves. They're really resilient. They can grow in a lot of places. They can't always grow wine well, but Syrah, and I put Sauv Blanc in this, you know, these are some of the varietals where they can thrive in a cool climate and they can thrive in a warmer climate. And they really, really express themselves differently in each. Each has its own like points that you love, like some of these, you know, some of the bigger Shiraz, the Barossa Shiraz. I mean, they're really fun to drink, right? Because I don't drink big wines like that all the time. So I have a couple friends that love these, you know, sort of bigger, more powerful wines, and they're delicious to drink, and they're making their own statement. And then, you know, if you were to pour that against this Syrah that I'm making from Russian River Valley, it's like two different worlds, right? Both are telling the same story of Syrah, but they're just in it, they're just on opposite ends of this like encyclopedia, of what Syrah is. And that to me is really what makes it fascinating. And I think we look to France a lot. And if you look at Northern Rhone Syrah and Southern Rhone Syrah, I mean, those two alone, even though we're still talking French Syrahs, they're drastically different, right? It's just a whole different world. And they can do that. And you're only talking, 100 miles or something difference between the top and the bottom of that valley there. So it's an awesome grape that I think tells this story of where it's planted and how it's made, more so than a lot of other grapes. I don't, not to go down on Cabernet, but a lot of the Cabernet that's coming out lately, I think the majority of it is really this rich style, richer, I think, than it has been, 15 years ago. And I believe that everybody's pushed to this rich style that is starting to lose its Cabernet essence. I don't think Syrah does that. I think it really, even though you can push it to this level here, or scale it back in a cool place to this, more light, elegant, sort of sexy style, it's still a Syrah and it still tells its story. And I think it's just one of the few grapes that really does that. And I think Sauv Blanc is the other one that really does it. I mean, there's great examples of Sauv Blanc from all over the world that are wildly different, New Zealand to Graves. I mean, there's like totally different to Loire Valley, to, the whole show. And Syrah fits in that. And that's one of the reasons why it's just fun to drink. On a marketing level, it could be one of the reasons why it's hard to market too, right? Because people don't exactly know what they're going to get. And so I think that for us as cool climate Syrah producers, we need to say, like, look, this is not your giant sort of cough syrupy, thick, gooey Syrah. This is cool climate Syrah. It's got tannins and acid and a light mid palate. It's medium bodied. It's pretty, and we need to be able to communicate that to our the top consumers, so that they understand it and understand what we're doing, because I think we're doing it year in and year out. But there's a lot of noise out there of these bigger, thicker, richer Syrah that is pulling away from this more elegant style.
Yeah. And, I think, Adam, you mentioned, it sort of surprised me to hear that even in Australia, people, where Shiraz, I think, probably holds a larger share of the market, there's still this blind spot to the idea that it can be anything but what, say, Barossa Valley produces. Are there particular messages that have been successful for Mount Langi Ghiran in educating the consumer?
I guess the key messages really have been always for Mount Langi that we are cool climate, so it's not what you would expect from the other warmer regions around Australia and even the world. We generally get compared to Northern Rhone stuff, like we're comparable to that. So sort of savoury, it can be, they're generally medium weight, but there's that spiciness too. So I guess people, like Anthony just said, they can be sort of polarizing in a way. People expect this big, rich fruit bomb, but they can be savoury and spicy and equally as good as anything else.
Yeah.
Hey, Adam, what is, like, I mean, I don't know, but is like Shiraz, Syrah, is that like is that the biggest red wine? I mean, is that what most people drink in Australia, or is it Cabernet, or is Syrah the Australian wine?
Shiraz is the Australian wine. So Shiraz is the Australian red wine and Chardonnay is the white. Yep. But yeah, it's the biggest. I mean, Pinot is very popular too, but Shiraz is the largest make and very widely consumed. You can find it anywhere. It is everywhere.
Yeah. And Paul, you had an interesting point about, so speaking of things being everywhere, that a little bit like, unfortunately, Chardonnay, there's a certain amount of confusion there as well, in part because it has been planted in so many different environments.
Yeah, I think, kind of Anthony already kind of alluded to that, it's like, it can grow so well and make different styles depending on, whether it's in a cool climate or hot climate. People are just confused about what the variety is about, and even probably confused on difference between Shiraz and Syrah, which is the same thing, but a lot may not realize that. So, you know, a little bit of confusion out there, maybe.
So looking ahead, I mean, none of us know the future. We don't want to be held to our prognostications, but what would you like to see, or what are some interesting projects that you have in mind for your Syrah and Shiraz? Is there anything that you, in the near future, you might look to change or play up, or is it really relying on the history that you've developed and knowing that is going to help weather whatever Mother Nature throws at us?
I've really started, of course, it started in Pinot for me, but I've really started doing whole cluster, more whole cluster on the Syrah. It's probably one of the reasons why I have to do the longer barrel aging as well. There's something about this brightness of aromatics that you feel. I mean, there's a little bit of carbonic, bright red fruit that I love the component in Syrah. So for me, the whole cluster is taking, every year it goes up just a little bit percentage wise and how we're making it. Of course, this is a year by year thing because, you know, not all stems are created equal. And there's some stems that if we have a really cold year and the stems are neon green, which happens, you know, I'm not going to do as much whole cluster, of course, because the extraction on the stems is just too green. But for me, that's really what I'm trying to do. You know, again, I want these wines to age, you know, and when they're just bottled or when they're just in barrel, they're really not that pleasant to drink. I mean, I hate to say that. They need the time. They need the time in the barrel for me, and they need the time in the bottle. And really, because it's like for us, we're always sort of swinging for the bleachers. These wines need the time, and I'm pushing that harder, I think, every year. And I think, you know, we've got a great wine club and core consumers, and they're kind of getting the feel for that and allowing me to do it, simply that they're buying the wines, right? Because if nobody buys the wines, we're all, you know, it's nice to get paid every other week type of thing. So we've built up this slowly built up this core consumer who are sort of expecting this ageable wine, ageable Shiraz from a cool climate with tannins and acidity both. And I'm going to keep pushing that. I mean, that's the future, I think, for this wine, is to get more serious and open up some of these 10-year-old bottles. And I think people will be thrilled at how they're tasting now. I think Syrah ages incredibly well. It's already got a spicy, meaty characterization to it. And when you put it in bottle a little bit time, it gets just more savory and like more delicious. And I think the 8 and 10-year-old wines from Balletto for Syrah right now are just starting to hit their drinkable window. They're really fun to drink.
Yeah, for us, you know, it's like I like using Grenache Syrah blend. The GSM has been a real success for us, and I really like educating allowing the tasting room people, or, you know, people in the trade, to educate the consumer or the buyer on the components that go into it. So that's one of the reasons we do a Syrah by itself. We do a Grenache by itself, so that, you know, the people can, you know, they love the GSM, but they don't really understand each variety. So having that single variety Grenache by itself and the Syrah by itself, Mourvedre is just a splash, but having at least those two in front of the consumer, or you know, a buyer or distributor, to explain what they're bringing to the blend, so you can educate them more on how good this variety actually is. That's my main tool for my main goal, is just educating people on Syrah.
Yeah. And Adam, you've got so much history to draw on there at Mount Langi. You mentioned some vines that date back to the 1960s, and of course your own association with the property goes well back into your lifetime. How do you draw on that looking forward?
It's really just adapting to the climate. But I mean, I can only echo what the guys just said. I mean, the philosophies are exactly the same. Really, I mean, for us, it's just getting people to try it. Once people get to the property, they're amazed and they try the wines, and generally they'll sign up to the wine club. So it's really yeah, I mean, just getting people to drink it and understand, or at least see an example of cool climate and see what Shiraz can be, and that it's not just this one-dimensional wine, that Shiraz can be a lot of different things. And we're lucky here, we make so much Shiraz that our portfolio is quite diverse. So we have, that rich, not fruit bomb, but we've got the top end and we've got the bottom end, and there's a big range in between. So, when people can see that what Shiraz can be, they can sort of set their benchmark, I guess, on what the style they like.
Yeah. Thank you very much, guys, for your time today. We are just about hitting our hour mark here. And thanks everyone for joining us for this discussion of cool climate Syrah and Shiraz. Hopefully you will find yourselves adding some more of it into your drinking repertoire. But again, a final thank you to everyone, especially Adam Lauder of Mount Langi, Ghiran, who was just speaking there, Paul Clifton of Hahn Family Wines, and Anthony Beckman of Balletto Vineyards. And on behalf of Benson, thanks again. We'll look to connect with you on another conversation in the future.